Welcome to devMode.fm, a podcast dedicated to the tools, techniques, and technologies used in modern web development. I'm Andrew Welch from NY Studio 107.
I'm Patrick Harrington from Mildly Geeky in Boston.
I'm Marion Newlevant here in Portland, Oregon.
And today we have on Ben Croker from PutYourLightsOn. Ben, how you doing?
I'm great. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thank you for coming to us all the way from where are you currently located?
I'm currently living in Austria,
Central
very
Europe.
nice. Yes,
very nice. And we decided to have you on because we want to talk about using Craft CMS as an application framework, specifically Craft CMS 3. And you're somebody that has done quite a bit in the plugin world. You have some plugin tutorials for Majingo. And you've also got some excellent plugins of your own. And I understand that you also do quite a bit with using Craft as an application framework, right?
Yeah. I mean, the plugins themselves are application development, I would consider. But yeah, we can go into more detail and about those definitions and what exactly that means.
Let's define it. What the hell are we talking about? Let's start with the basics. When we talk about Craft CMS, Content Management System, like what does that mean?
So the CMS itself is, well, let's see. Craft 3 is now built on Yi2, right? And Yi2 is a PHP framework.
Hold on, I got to do this. Yi stands for yes, it is.
Does
That's
it?
Right.
Yes, it does. When I'm doing this for Patrick, Patrick said that he would have the same reaction that he had off air. Patrick, you have failed.
Well, you completely killed the delivery. The question is, what does it stand for? Anyway, I'm still blown away. I mean, I've been working with Yi, by virtue of working with Craft for 5.5 years, and I've never heard that it stands for yes, it is.
Did you do a facepalm?
I did. No, I have a headset on, so I can't.
And this is actually making me question your credibility because I said the same thing on the Brandon Kelly interview. I don't know where you are. 100%. Go back and listen to it in the archives. Really? Folks who are listening, if you haven't heard the interview we did with Brandon Kelly, it's actually really good and worth listening to.
Well, I think I heard it, but I didn't put the two and two together. That you just, I thought you said yes, it is, and I'm like, oh, he's just responding. Yes, it is. Yeah. This is making me question Craft, but anyway.
When I first heard that it was yes, it is, I did the marketing guy in me kind of did a facepalm. But Ben, you're saying that in theory it means something else in Chinese?
Well, apparently, according to the wiki page, in Chinese it means simple and evolutionary.
Okay, and the fun part about this is my wife is Chinese, and she speaks fluent Mandarin, Cantonese. That's not the funny part now. She speaks fluent Mandarin, Cantonese, Hakka, Hokkien, and some other dialects that I don't even know. And I asked her what Yi means in Mandarin or Chinese, and she wrote back and said, no idea. So I'm starting to doubt maybe someone just kind of made that up. You know what I mean?
You think better of their marketing people, Andrew. They made that up.
Yeah. Well, okay, that's true. I just dinged them for not having good marketing people, and they
made up yes, it is to cover for something else worse.
Anyway, Ben. So yes, Craft CMS is built on Yi2. Go ahead.
Right. So Craft CMS itself is an application which allows you to manage your content, and then obviously through templates or through APIs display that content in various places. We know it best because we use it generally to power our websites and to manage our content through it. So that's what a CMS is.
Now I've heard some people have bantered around the phrase or the acronym CMF. What the heck is a CMF?
So I'm guessing you're talking about content management framework.
Correct.
I've never seen that used abbreviated as that without content management framework. But that is the idea that Craft goes a bit beyond being a content management system as we know it, and is almost evolving to be a framework on which to build content management related applications.
Mm-hmm.
So a framework generally, we can think of, I'm sure we've used many different frameworks, from JavaScript frameworks, PHP frameworks, etc. And the idea here is that a new type of framework is emerging on which, I mean, I've heard content management framework being used. I kind of think of it as content-driven application development framework. I know
Sure.
that's a lot of words, but it's kind of web apps that are content-driven,
Mm-hmm.
if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, that rings true to me. I mean, I don't see yourself building an alternative CMS aside from,
Right.
yeah, I mean, obviously, technically, you would have all the classes and all of the scaffolding you would needed to build your own CMS and throw away their admin and all that. But yeah, content, really content integrated framework it sounds a little bit more true to me.
Yeah, and this isn't really a new concept. Like, I think Craft 3 is really making us think differently, perhaps, about how we develop apps, because, well, we'll probably talk about different frameworks out there and how it compares to those, but you can really build quite complex, quite performant and scalable apps on it.
Yeah, I mean, let me tell you something that I did back when I first. This was really, it wasn't the first, but it was one of the first projects that I ever did on Craft CMS. So this is Craft CMS 2 back in 2015, maybe something like that. So I was a little late to the party, but I ended up writing basically a software as a service app, and wait for it, entirely in Twig.
Oh,
Like,
oh,
and I remember showing it to Lindsay DiLoretto in the Craft Slack. I pasted in like some code, and it filled up like the entire Slack channel with just like Twig code that ran this thing. And he's just like, yeah, that's something you probably would want to put into a plugin.
There might be a better way.
But all I'm saying is it's doable. I wouldn't recommend it, but even back then, even without doing custom PHP development, Twig is actually and the APIs that Twig gives you access to from Craft, you can actually do quite a bit, right?
Oh yeah.
You absolutely can, yeah. And since Craft 3, you can do even more, because Craft 3 has exposed all of Craft's native services to Twig.
Right. Yeah. So ironically, you need plugins less in some ways, right?
Well, I wouldn't go that far, but you can certainly do more, yeah, with Twig, yeah.
Right.
But going back to the framework idea, I was saying this isn't really a new concept. It's just Craft 3 is kind of taking it to a new level. But I was saying back in the days of Expression Engine 2, at various conferences I was speaking at, I was saying, well, don't think of Expression Engine 2 as just a CMS. Think of it also as a framework. And in retrospect, maybe that was maybe it wasn't quite mature enough at that stage.
We'll use the word ambitious.
Ambitious, yeah. Yep.
Yeah. But the reason was that Expression Engine, when version 2 came out, was built on top of CodeIgniter, which for its time was a very advanced and very well built PHP framework.
Right.
And that kind of union of the CMS plus the framework, in my mind, made lots of things possible. Yeah. And then Expression Engine 3 came along, and they split off from CodeIgniter, and they made them two different products. And then, yeah, that was to my dismay. But anyway, regardless of that, it has been possible for a long time to build, let's call them content-driven applications on top of these CMSs, because they've provided this plugin architecture, or in Expression Engine's case, add-on architecture, for quite a while.
But Ben, even if you're not making your own custom plugins or your own custom modules or whatever, I mean, I've argued this, and maybe I'm wrong, but I think that very few people do pure web development these days. You're using some kind of a front-end framework, you're using jQuery, you're really kind of building a whole bunch of custom functionality that a lot of websites are kind of blurring the line between website and app, where you're really doing custom software development every time you make a website.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you've said a few times, Andrew, that web development is dead.
Right.
I wouldn't go that far, but I think, yeah, just purely building websites, just website development, perhaps, who's doing that these days? We're all working in one
Right.
web app or another, whether it be Craft, which is a web app, right? You're building out the web app on the back end,
Right.
and perhaps it's powering a very small brochure site on the front end,
Right.
which you could call a website, but the back end is a web app.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the reason I am saying it's dead is, first of all, it gets people's attention, right? But then also because I really do think that a lot of the things that people used to do in web development, like just the HTML, CSS, and very little, if any, JavaScript. I mean, I think that type of thing is going to be taken over by these various builder tools, right?
Yeah.
Like Webflow, for instance, is actually pretty fantastic, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there are lots of other things that are like social media has replaced some things, and even medium.com. And you know what I mean? Like there are lots of places where traditional web development is now using tools or a platform to build stuff, as opposed to just kind of rolling your own. And most of the people that are paying to have a custom website built, their expectations a little bit higher in terms of the amount of custom work that's done.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I totally agree. I mean, web development has evolved so much in recent years. It used to be that, you would touch every aspect of a web development build, and, you'd know a little bit of everything. It was important back then to be a jack of all trades. And these days, I
Right.
think more and more people are specializing, in back, whether it be back end, front end.
Yeah, and an analogy that I've made to some non tech people that I talk to is it's kind of like being a lawyer or a doctor. Like, yeah, I mean, there are general practitioners, but most people pick a specific part and focus on that. Like, I'm a criminal lawyer, I'm a trial attorney. I do divorce settlements, or I do bankruptcies, or whatever,
Hmm.
because the law has gotten so vast that in order to be any good, you have to specialize. And it kind of seems the same way for web development to an extent, at least to me.
Yeah, it's a good way to put it. I mean, for your everyday cough or cold, or even a sprain, you go to your general practitioner. But if it's something
Right.
complex or something that's a real problem, and you're going to need a specialist. And I think, that's kind of the way the web's going. For a
Yeah.
lot of small mom and pop places, they can go to a Squarespace or
Yep.
someone who is just FTPing their files up to the server and doing it old school. But as you get into complex integrations and dependency management, because you're using these big, you don't have to write your own custom PHP for every CRM you want to integrate with. You're going to need bigger and better tools, and someone has to put a lot of time into learning and understanding those.
Yeah, you're building an app. I mean, when I first started using Grunt and then Gulp and then Webpack, I had flashbacks to using Makefiles, right? And Marion, I'm sure you're familiar with them, right?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. I mean, all of it. So everything that is new was old again, or however that phrase goes. But you really are. I mean, you're doing development. You've got build files. You've got all the dependencies. You've got all this stuff that comes along with real, quote unquote, real development. And I think that a lot of web developers who are designer developers kind of like backed into this, and they're like, wait a minute, what the heck happened here? But I do want to kind of circle back to what we were talking about in terms of what can we do with Craft to build to use it as an application framework, and how do we distinguish between that and just a website?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's good maybe that we kind of figure out the definitions and
Sure.
distinctions. So if we say a website is, well, we all know what a website is, but if we limit a website to displaying static content, so a brochure website where you can click around, you can read things, you can see images, but the amount of interactivity you can have with the website is limited. And as soon as that interactivity becomes available, so for example, what would be an example? Well, maybe
even like a contact form, right?
Right, even a contact form where you submit something, or like if there's a restaurant website where you can, make a reservation or
Mhm.
or do some sort of interactivity with the website, then you need
Right.
something on the back end that can handle that. And I think that's at the stage at which it becomes a web app. Or
Mhm.
any website where you have, an account that you can log into and you can, add things to a list or add things to your shopping cart, that kind of thing. And at that stage, it becomes a web app, which is a piece of software that uses web browsers and web technology and communicates with a web server somewhere. And in this case, we're talking about how do you do that? How would you build that on Craft CMS? Use that as a platform. Because when you're building web apps, the question very often comes up, well, what framework should I use? Very few pieces of software these days are built, purely on vanilla JS or vanilla PHP.
Yeah, because for anything hard, it's just way too complicated.
Yeah, absolutely. And these days, applications are getting bigger and bigger, and we're using object-oriented code more and more, which is a great thing, I think. Coming from computer science background, that's what I learned originally, and then I kind of forgot all about it. And now I see it's returning in PHP, which was originally a procedural language.
Right.
But that means that we're kind of relying on these frameworks to help us to structure our code, to write good code, to write reusable code, maintainable code, scalable, etc. All of these things, whereas before maybe that wasn't as much of a priority. So,
Well, let me ask you a question, though. So, I mean, the interesting thing here is that Craft CMS, in some ways, with Craft CMS 3, is kind of almost built alongside of Yi. In that, yes, I realize that it is built on top of the Yi 2 application framework, and it kind of builds content modeling and an admin CP GUI in the backend for you. But when I say it's kind of built alongside it, is that you can, when you are creating a plugin or a module, you're essentially just creating something for Yi, right? And you can or cannot, as you so choose, access the Craft APIs.
yeah,
Does that make sense?
that makes sense.
Yeah, to me, I think part
Did
of
I
it is.
derail you? I'm sorry.
I mean, to me, I think part of it is that you almost have to have a mindset. Like you're switching away from using the craft scaffolding that you get with the create project on Composer, where you have index.php and it totally takes control of everything, to maybe thinking
Right.
of it as just one other packages library that you brought in. You may want to use it for your front end, web root rendering. You may want to use it just as the place where you're you may want to set up another web root folder and just get Ajax responses from it and use an entirely different library or tool set for building your front end.
Yeah.
I think it changes the mindset from, Craft is going to own everything of rendering the content view and running everything, then think of it as one more library that I'm going to be running.
And I guess I didn't really complete my thought, so I don't blame you for being like, "What the hell are you talking about?" I guess where I was kind of going with that is like when someone comes to you and they need a custom web app built, one of your choices is that you can build it in Laravel if you want to stick with PHP, right? You could do a custom app in Laravel. You could take advantage of the Laravel Nova that just came out. But another choice is that you could build the same custom app using Yi 2 and leveraging that framework the same way that you would leverage Laravel. But then you also get the admin CP and the content model from Craft for free. And there are some cases where doing that will just save you a ton of development time.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a consideration that, I mean, to be honest, I used to, have to ask that question every time. What is the best framework to use to build this? These days, I'm kind of trying to find reasons why Craft would not be the right tool.
Sure.
But that's, that's just based on the type of projects I take on these days. But you're
Sure.
right. Yeah. Yi 2 is, equivalent to Laravel. And if you're building a module or a plugin, well, a plugin is specific to Craft, but if you're building a module, then it could be just a Yi 2 module and sitting next to Craft. Yeah.
Right.
The thing I've never actually found a use case where I'm building a plugin where I've thought, well, this doesn't need to be a plugin, this can be a module. But they're actually very closely related.
Yeah, every plugin is a module,
Right.
and plugins just add the ability to have migrations that run and to have settings and to be installed and uninstalled. But other than that, it's basically a Craft module. And I think back to the presentation that Nate Eiler did at .all last year, where he used Craft CMS 3 to create a REST API for some various stuff that they were doing, and there wasn't really anything in there that was that Craft specific.
Right.
In terms of he was using the E2 controllers and routers to do all this stuff, but he did it on Craft 3 because he did want that nice content and user modeling kind of for free in the backend.
Yeah, that's right. So Craft provides a bunch of APIs and services that you can use, but it's totally optional. Yeah.
Yeah. And the interesting thing also is that when I'm sitting down to do a custom app for somebody, there's always the question of, well, do I develop a custom plugin or module, or do I use a service, right? And it's kind of the not conflict, but the decision between the traditional way of doing things, which is, I write my own app, and the Jamstack way of doing things, where yes, I'm writing my own app, but I'm plugging into services. And the interesting thing here, at least to me, is that Craft will work either way, right? Like it can be a headless CMS data provider that integrates into your, whether you're using React or Vue or whatever on the front end, and it can work that way. Or you can develop the back end custom in PHP, and it's super flexible because you can use it in any of these scenarios.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of Craft these days, that you can use it as a headless CMS. And I think that's just another argument to why it's more of a framework than before. As you said, you can do it all with templates, with Twig code, but you can also
don't know. I did it, and I look back at it and I'm like, what the hell did you do? like really? Yeah. I mean, some things, like, just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Right. But I think an important question to ask is, should I build this, whatever this web app is supposed to do, should I build it on top of Craft, or should I just go straight for a framework like E or Laravel, which would probably result in something less bloated and maybe even more performant? But of course, Craft adds many benefits, especially if what you're building, it is a content-driven application. And by that, I mean, it has whatever type of content it is. But as soon as you have to manage content, then you also need to manage that content somehow. And the beauty of Craft is that you get this wonderful, intuitive content management experience, along with a bunch of other benefits, such as, users and authentication and localization. And in addition to that, you also have like a model for your contents. I think one huge feature of Craft that is often overlooked is element types.
Right.
And what element types allow you to do is create this, I guess, content model, which is native to Craft, and which kind of gives your content a bunch of really useful functionality right out of the box. So, for anyone who's not familiar with what I'm talking about, entries and users and categories and a couple of other things are element types in Craft. And anytime you're on a page that you can, search and filter stuff by and change the order, and you have sources over on the left-hand side, that's an element index page. So when you're building a Craft plugin, then you have access to, you can create your own element types, and all of that functionality comes for free. You have to do very little in terms of setup, which means that whole content model is there for you. And it's really quite flexible. It's not so rigid. You can choose, should this element type be sortable? Should it be localizable? and
Well,
specify.
and Ben, you you left out one of my favorite things
Yeah.
of the benefits of using Craft is that you have somebody else that maintains all this stuff. Right?
Yeah.
You can definitely roll your own, write your own custom admin stuff, write your own content model, do this, that, the other thing. And yes, it's super flexible because you can do exactly what you want. But maintaining stuff like that it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
And it's nice to have smart people like the folks at Pixel and Tonic that are responsible for maintaining that and that are adding new features to that and are also dealing with the security issues
Mm-hmm.
that could potentially come up. I love the fact that I don't have to deal with that aspect of it,
Yeah, absolutely. If you roll your own admin panel or control panel, then you have to maintain it, you have to update it, you have to develop it. So all of that.
And what happens? Like I got a buddy of mine that owns an agency, and they built a custom CMS on Laravel, and they did what you said. They rolled their own admin panel. They did all this kind of stuff, and they're using this for all their clients, and it kind of locks their clients in, which is probably good for them. But what happens when they have there's a 0-day security exploit, and they have to go in and not only find and fix whatever this is,
Mhm.
but then roll it out everywhere. I mean, it seems like something that an agency or even a custom app developer just might not want to have to deal with.
Right, right. And this is one of the huge benefits of using a product like Craft CMS, because it is a product, right? It's a commercial product, and some people aren't okay with that, and that's fine. But the benefits that we get are security updates, maintenance updates, continual development, extra features being added, and you buy a license once, and now you have annual. Do you have annual? Yeah, for the yeah, you have
Yes.
annual fees for Craft now. But they're I find them
For the pro edition.
for the
Yes.
pro, yeah. But I find that the benefits far outweigh the cost of a license and the updates.
Oh yeah. And that's the thing. Like, I know most of the people that work at Pixel and Tonic, and they're super smart. And I love. It's almost like having them on your team.
Mm,
And Brandon Kelly specifically is scary smart. I mean, he really
He is.
is.
Yeah.
And having someone like that gives me a lot of confidence that, okay, he's working on maintaining this. He knows about developers. He knows what developers need. And I love that.
Yeah.
I absolutely love that when I'm looking at developing a custom app that I have almost smart friends as partners.
Yeah, no, sure. Brandon is extremely smart, as are most of the team, if not all. And not just
Well,
smart
we're
from
not
a,
sure about Andrews. We don't really know about Andrews. But everybody else, yeah, I agree.
right, and they're not just smart from a technical point of view, right? They're kind of all around smart, which is what you
Yes.
need. And
Right.
honestly, they're the most confidence-inspiring team, and Craft is the most confidence-inspiring software that I've worked in my entire career, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's probably why the community is gathered around it, and community is so important for software. And we just see the growth. It's continual growth at the moment.
Yeah, which is fantastic to see. And also the fact that they kind of have their finger on the pulse, and they know that, for instance, APIs are super important, and that being able to run it headless is super important to people, and they're on the ball with this stuff.
Yeah. So I think we went on a tangent. We were talking about element types and what Craft offers.
I live on a tangent.
Going off.
That is my home.
Let's talk to Buffalo Bill.
This tangent so far, nothing we're going to have to cut out of the recording. So we're doing well.
Oh, stop. All right, put us back on track, Ben.
All right. We were talking about element types. So one of the other thing, of course, which is extremely powerful in Craft, and this has to do with element types as well, is that you can relate elements to each other, right? You can have relational fields. So you get all of this content modeling when you build a plugin for Craft. You can choose to use element types, but you don't have to. You can roll your own. content models. So so in my experience, if I'm building a web app, my consideration is, well, do I need to work with content? And if it doesn't, then I would look at maybe a lighter framework, Laravel or Yi or Symfony, or there are enough out there. But if you have to do something with content, especially if you need things like authentication and a management experience,
Right.
then Craft seems to me, or let's not say Craft, but a content management system that offers that type of framework for building plugins or mini apps on top of is just a no-brainer.
Yeah, and as an example, I know there's a company that I've worked with that they're rebuilding what is essentially an application form, right?
Mhm.
And they decided to go the custom route, and they're rebuilding it all in Go on the back end and Vue on the front end, and it's all going to work and it's all going to be great. But the one thing they're missing out on is they're going to have to build their own admin UI if they want to allow marketing, for instance, to change the form. Or it's going to be a development loop where marketing says, well, we need this change in the form, and then it goes to the developers and goes through that whole development QA stakeholder kind of loop. Whereas if they had used a CMS, whether it's Craft or something else, there are some fantastic form plugins out there that would let them design and change in the back end the form, and they just click save and it would work.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so why would you not? I mean, at the moment, also with the Craft plugin store, which is a huge development, because now we have this centralized distribution channel for plugins, and it's
Absolutely.
created this entire ecosystem where you can go and you need, like you said, you need a form plugin, and you just go and you see what's available, and I'm sure there are multiple form plugins available to choose from, and you pick the one that's right for you, and you're good to go. And if you need to make customizations to that, it's very simple to build an extra plugin or a module that extends the functionality of another plugin. So that's one thing that
exactly.
that's one thing that Craft or let's say Pixel and Tonic have done from the beginning, and that's, I'm sure, based on their experience. They started out as add-on developers in Expression Engine,
Right.
so they know what it's like to be an add-on or plugin developer. So every plugin can talk to every other plugin in Craft. So it's not a matter of changing the core of a plugin. It's also not a matter of calling up the plugin developer and saying, "Hey, please add this functionality." It's just all you need is access to the service. Sometimes you will need an event to be triggered if you need to plug into some of the functionality. In that case, you would need the developer to make a small change. But most
and that's what they would do here, right? So this application form, there are some custom steps that would happen along the way, but they would get the form layout. Marketing would be able to go in there and change it, and then for the few bits that are custom, you just add your own module that handles the custom logic, and kind of away you go. And I don't know. I mean, part of me is like, why reinvent the wheel, right? I mean, why don't we leverage all of the work that smart people have done for us?
Yeah, we have some great developers in the Craft community, and I mean, when I built, so I recently put out a plugin called Campaign, which does email marketing campaigns, and I had to learn so much about email marketing to do that. So much
more than you ever wanted.
Absolutely,
right?
yeah. But if I was to think about building a form plugin now, then I'd have to go learn everything about forms that there is to learn, and other people have done that, so I kind of trust their expertise. And
but I do want to circle back to something you said, because I think you're spot on. Is that the advent of the plugin store is a big deal, right? And the reason why I think it's such a big deal is that, I used to make iOS apps, and I did that kind of stuff. And the iPhone was popular when it was introduced, but really it was the advent of the App Store that caused it to absolutely soar in terms of popularity. And I think that it can't be understated how important it is to create an ecosystem like this around craft.
Yeah, I mean, the plugin store has, multiple benefits that it brought. I think from my perspective, the biggest benefit was one-click updating for plugins,
Yeah,
because
that's nice.
that's a huge thing that I can,
Yep.
if I encounter a bug, I can fix it. And before, there was no way of doing that. Before, someone would buy a license, they'd get they'd get the source code as a download. They'd have to upload it to the server, install it, and keep an eye on the changelog. Or I'd have to, tweet out, or I could email everybody who bought a license,
Right.
but you don't want to be doing that for each bug fix.
Yeah, I definitely think the one-click updating is fantastic, but at least from my perspective, the most important thing is that it has created an ecosystem so that smart people like you are going to go out there and create an actual product. Like, for instance, you did with Campaign. And what that causes is then agencies or freelancers or whatever who are trying to put something together can kind of just grab that off the shelf thing and plug it in and use it. And if that and some people have complained, oh, plugins won't be free or whatever. But listen, I mean, the amount of time that it will save you from having to try and reinvent the wheel and do this yourself is just ridiculous. And creating that ecosystem where people like you are going to go in there and make stuff that other people can use, it raises the bar in terms of what you can make and how quickly you can make it.
Yeah.
I think what it does is it makes it reasonable to have sort of inexpensive plugins, because there's always going to be free plugins. Like, my plugins
Absolutely.
are free because I don't want to be on the hook for supporting them. So I
Right.
can't charge. I try to support them, but I don't want to be on the hook. And they're small.
Right.
And then if you have
You're still on the hook.
well, it's
People are still going to complain even if you don't support and update the free plugin.
that's true.
Like, I
But
guarantee
my
it.
feelings about blowing them off would be different.
That's
And
true. That's
you know,
true.
if you're writing a plugin like Commerce or something, then clearly you're going to charge for that, and you're probably going to charge enough for that it's kind of worth the hassle of dealing with charging for it. But if you have a little plugin that is like a hassle for you to have written, and it's a bit of a hassle, you're willing to be on the hook for it, but not for free. It's just a sort of a smallish plugin, the $5 to $50 plugins, then you can have them in the App Store, and they're not a horrific challenge for anybody.
Right.
And we didn't have that
Yeah.
before. We had free plugins, and free plugins that weren't too much of a hassle to update, because you get the little notification that it needs updating, and you'd go download a new one and update it, and it wasn't too bad. And then there were the humongous ones like Commerce that, of course, they're a big deal. But then there, the little ones that, this one, Craft 2, this plugin, and it needs to be updated, and who has the license, and how do I, it's just a runaround every time the things got updated.
Well, we did have paid plugins even back in Craft 2, but it was kind of fragmented, right? There would be a couple islands where you could buy them from, and there was no centralized place. But I think you made a really good point, Marion, about the primary reason why you're not wanting to charge for these is support. I really think that when you're developing a product that people are using, especially when they're using it in a professional capacity, like people are agencies and freelancers are using Craft CMS and Craft CMS plugins, I think what you're really buying when you're buying the plugin is you're buying the support and the updates. Like, that's the important part, And we as developers are like, oh, the code's the most important, but I think for a lot of people that's not the case. I think the support and the updates are where the real value is.
Well, the peace of mind.
Well, how many times have you worked on something and it's an open source project that the person got bored of, or they're onto a new job and they're not maintaining it or whatever, and it doesn't work anymore, and there's some cost involved there too. If I'm working on a project and something that it depends on, if that person isn't incentivized to maintain it, I mean, that can be kind of painful. I went through that with, especially in the expression engine world, where a lot of plugins were just dead. And I mean, trying to upgrade the site was just, I mean, it was almost a non-starter.
Yeah,
You know?
that's, I mean, Drupal, every single Drupal project, because of their licensing, essentially you can't make proprietary Drupal plugins. Everything has to be, what is it, LGPL, whatever it is, that basically it's a contagious must make open source license.
Right.
That if you build on top of Drupal, which is open source, you have to make whatever you make open source, or you can charge for it, but then other people could sell it for free if they want and give it away. And yeah, you frequently see modules that had issues that had been on there for years. You'd see people, different open source contributors who mean well, but literally discussing the best way to fix a bug for a year or two. And you're like, I just need it to work now, and can I pay you? And it's nice to have people be incentivized and make it easy for them to roll out updates, and it's a great ecosystem.
Yeah, the only thing worse than design by committee is development by committee. Like literally, it's the only thing worse than that. But yeah, I mean, I don't mean to come off as negative towards open source software, because I love it, and there have been some absolutely fantastic open source software projects. We have to understand that most of the major open source projects are funded by companies that employ full-time developers, that it's in their best interest to kind of maintain this communal thing. And when you're looking at smaller things, like smaller ecosystem things, that can be a little bit more difficult. So probably we went off on yet another tangent, but I'm good at that.
Well, I think we're going to see perhaps a trend now in the plugin store. I saw that Solspace have released freeform payments, I think they called it today, which is essentially an add-on plugin for freeform where you can accept payments. So I believe that Pixeltonic are kind of working on making this possible natively, where you can sell features in a plugin. So rather than have to create a new plugin that adds on to an existing plugin, it'll be a little bit like the in-app purchases that you can do in iOS. So I imagine there'll be a trend towards that, where you can sell features of the plugin. So you only have to buy the features that you will use.
Yeah, they're calling it editions. And it's going to be in this is from the horse's mouth. It is going to be in the 3.1 release.
I'm so excited for 3.1. It's not even funny.
Well, yeah. Didn't he say that's what they're planning, or was that definite?
He said, the man, Brandon, said that will be in 3.1. I saved a screenshot of it. I have evidence. I have
put it in your blackmail folder. Yep.
I have backed it up to multiple locations.
Okay.
So
well, time will tell how that works. Nice. But what that will enable is also offering a free version, which would be nice, a kind of scaled down version of a plugin. So people who are using the solo edition, or just have a very small site and they only need a small subset of the functionality that a plugin offers, then perhaps it makes sense that they would be able to use a free edition of the plugin.
The hard part I have with that is it's actually really hard for me as a plugin developer to think of where the line is, right? Because you want there to be enough there that it's actually useful, but not enough there that they would never buy the full or pro edition. And then also by making the free edition, you are kind of inherently supporting it. Right? Like I know that, hey, it's free. You don't really need to support it, but you kind of have to some extent or another. If someone posts a question on your GitHub issue page, like you can't be looking up whether they have a valid paid non-free version license. Like you're just going to answer it.
Well, whenever I have, an ambiguous thought like that, I look at how Pixeltonic and Craft have done it. And I believe their solo edition, you're only really supposed to use as the developer for your own website. You're not supposed to go build websites for other people and use the solo edition. So something along those lines, because if there's a developer who's using my plugins to build client sites, I would be happy to let them have a free version for their own website, right? Knowing that they're gonna,
Sure.
and I think it's about supporting each other as well, in a sense, and still respecting that we're professionals here and we're making a living out of this.
Right. Yeah, and what I've said is just I will follow Pixel and Tonic in terms of whatever their policy is. If they offer a discount for a particular NGO, then I'll offer them the same discount. I'm just letting, or I'm waiting for them to roll out support for that. That's something that they have also been planning to do. But kind of getting back to the concept of using Craft CMS 3 as a application platform, like how far can we get with it by just using Twig and off-the-shelf plugins?
Well, you can get pretty far, as you already told us. You can build a whole API if you want to, and as we said, with Craft 3, you have access to the services. But the question really is should you be doing it in the templates?
Yes.
And when your templates get overly complex, probably at that stage you need to reconsider. Would this be more suited to a plugin? And for anybody who's afraid of getting into plugin development and writing PHP code, it's really, well, I'm biased maybe, but it's really not that difficult. I know that some people are saying, well, the docs are lacking and there aren't enough resources, but they're, Andrew, you're putting out lots of stuff, and I can't say much, but by the end of this month, I'll be also putting out some more learning resources. So, and there's Plugin Factory as well. So I think there are enough resources. It's just a matter of kind of getting over that hurdle of, okay, I'm going to start writing PHP code, and I'm going to start interacting with Craft,
right.
Not through Twig, not only through Twig, but also through the services directly with PHP code.
Yeah, and this is where if you are a designer, developer, or typically a front end developer, this is kind of where you make your choice for a particular project. And your choice is: do I write something custom? Do I invest the time in getting up to speed doing learning PHP and doing Craft plugins, or do I just use a service? Mm-hmm. Right? I mean, isn't that the choice that a lot of people are making these days? Like,
by service, you mean like a third-party hosted service, or?
Yeah. So, if let's say I'm doing Jamstack development, so their model is that you're not really going to have any custom code running on the back end. You're just going to plug services in, right? So if I want to do campaigns, I'll plug into MailChimp, or I'll integrate with Salesforce because that's what our marketing team uses, and that's sort of the choice that you face is, well, am I going to does it make sense for this project to write something custom, or does it make sense to use a service? Right. And the answer is different for every project.
Yeah, it absolutely is. I'm a big advocate of bringing things into the content management system if they are related to the content that already exists in there. So obviously, these software as a service platforms offer a huge amount of benefit, because you don't need to reinvent the wheel, and they're maintaining the software. They're also maintaining the hardware. So that you're going to get, in most cases, a good user experience. The drawback, of course, and the big complaint that comes is, well, you got to pay your monthly fees, and those can really add up. If you're using MailChimp and sending to, tens of thousands of subscribers every month, that can really add up.
And I think there's also a customization element to it too, right? Like a lot of these services are quite good, but there also are times where a client wants something very specific, and maybe they'll chafe against what is offered by that particular service.
Right. Yeah. Good luck writing a feature request to MailChimp and having it added in the near future. Yeah. Yeah. So that's.
I'm going to tell Salesforce I want them to add this particular custom feature I want. I'm sure they'll get right back to me.
So yeah, that's the big benefit of a plugin. You have full control over it, and you can make any customizations you need. but it can be a lot of work, right? Depending on the complexity. And in the beginning stages, you need to consider: do I outsource this, or am I able to build this myself, or does a plugin exist? Because very often, if there's a plugin that exists that does something similar but not quite, just contact the developer. Maybe they would be happy to take on a project where they build a custom version for you.
And that's where I think it gets back to what we were talking about before in terms of where Craft sits on this spectrum of building custom apps. Let's say we put Laravel kind of over on the super custom side. Mm-hmm. And I realize that there are tools to get you up to speed, and that there are different frameworks you can use for it. And then all the way over on the other side might be just a prefab service that you would use. The interesting thing about Craft to me is that it sits right in the middle, right? So if you need just a little bit of customization, great, go in. You can do whatever little customization you want, and you can leverage Craft for the rest of it, right? If you need lots of customization, go ahead. The whole Y2 framework is there. Customize it to your heart's content, and you can come up with something super custom. So, I mean, that's the kind of nice thing to me about it, is that you can, if I'm starting a new project in Laravel, yes, I can leverage a lot of things that are out there, but there's still, for certain projects, a lot that I will be doing on my own. And for Craft, I can just use it, and I can do custom stuff for as much or as little as is needed for that project.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one of the concerns that comes up, this is something I hear sometimes, well, what about performance? Will building a Craft plugin perform as well as, an app built on Laravel? So again, to go back to what we were saying earlier, Craft is built on top of the Yi framework. So the Yi2 framework, especially since version 2, performs very well, scales very well.
Oh, it's amazing.
And has extensibility built in. So you're still working with a PHP framework that's very performant. There is a little bit of bloat, I will say, when you start building Craft plugins.
Sure,
but
only when you're leveraging the Craft APIs, which you may or may not need to do depending on what you're doing.
Exactly, yeah. And performance is something that I think there's a few misconceptions about it. I mean, performance is important, of course, but not in every situation, right? Like sometimes if you're just loading a page that gets loaded every once in a while, it doesn't need to load in half a second. But performance is important to address in the right situations. And Craft does offer the ability to do that. You can use, the native active records, or you can just write your own queries using the query builder. And that's one thing I was actually surprised by in the beginning when I was looking at the Craft code, that they often, rather than working with active records, I know I'm getting a bit technical here, but they will use the query builder, and that's for performance reasons.
Yeah, exactly.
So you have options, and it's when you get into it, then it's important to understand what the performance hits of doing things in different ways are.
Yeah, I think you said it really well. And again, for me, it just kind of hits the sweet spot in terms of the what you get for free, and then also the flexibility. You get a lot of times there are frameworks out there or CMSs out there that you get a lot of stuff for free, but then you're very kind of confined to what is there. And that's really not the case with Craft 3, which is what I think, what I really like about it. I can build anything from a brochure site to a totally custom app using the same tool and not bending it into something that it shouldn't be doing. Hello, WordPress,
And hello, writing the whole thing in Twig.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay.
Well, I would do
Marion.
that. I would do that.
That was a headshot. But also, and not writing the whole thing custom, whether it's in Laravel or it's in
or in
Nodes
PHP
or whatever, or just and I saw a project where they were actually building something rather substantial on just pure PHP, and it made me want to vomit. Like some of the stuff that I saw in there. I mean, I'm not saying it can't be done, but Jesus, why? There's so many good frameworks that you could build stuff on these days. I don't
Well, that's
get
kind
it.
of what a framework is, I think, is it gives you a way to organize your code. It gives you a framework where you can plug in your stuff. And if you don't have a framework where you can plug in your stuff, that's fine, but you'd better be pretty damn organized all on your own, or you just end up with a chaotic mess.
Well, and it gives you a base though. It takes care of like these basic things like, security and database injections and it's just all these things that no one should be just rewriting that every time.
Right.
You know?
It gives you the low level or a level, and
Right.
it gives you support and guidance for how to extend it.
Yeah, I think
Right.
that's a really good point, Marion. When it comes to consistency, right? Because when you start with a framework like Yi or Laravel, you can do things any way you want, which sounds wonderful until you sit down to code something and you're like, oh, how should I actually structure my code and my classes? And
Mm-hmm.
you don't need to do it in Craft 3. In Craft 2, it was a bit more of a rigid plugin system, but in Craft 3, you can have your directories and folders structured however you want, and your classes too. But what I very often do is I just refer to the Craft code base, and I look at, well, how did Pixel and Tonic do it, and they're the authority, as far as I'm concerned, on building plugins or anything in Craft. So how did they do it? How are they structuring their code and their models and their records and their services, etc.? And and you almost have something to model to say, okay, well that's how Pixel and Tonic are doing it. I don't have to do it that way, but at least I have a starting point. And if I need some guidance, I just go look there. And consistency, as we know,
Yeah.
is very important in software development.
Yeah, 100%. And let me give you a real world example because you can, as I've been mentioning, you can leverage what's there or you cannot, depending on the application. So, perfect example is Retour, which is a plugin that I just came out with for doing 404 redirects, right? And I could have leveraged the Craft APIs and I could have made every redirect could be an element. And every redirect statistic could be an element. But holy crap, would that be slow, right? And also to very little benefit, right? Because you're not really want to relate a 404 statistic to anything else,
To some
and
product, maybe.
yeah,
Some commerce
you know,
product as it's 404
but
statistics
but
related.
then when a bot starts hitting your site
No, it's a
and you're
terrible idea.
and you're generating, and so what I did is, yes, I could have made a custom element type and I could have used all that, but I said that's stupid. Like for this, it doesn't make any sense. I'm not going to get a real benefit out of it. So I just did exactly what you were talking about, Ben, where I'm using or I'm creating DB queries to just read just what I want and just write just what I want, so that it can be performant. And that's a case of what I've been mentioning in terms of the APIs are there if it makes sense to use them, but you don't have to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking of performance, I'm curious how long that confetti feature took you to build.
So the confetti itself took me about 5 seconds. Because that is just it's a Vue.js component, right? So all I had to do was yarn add the component and do a little bit. The Webpack config that I had to make for the backend, that took me a couple weeks. but I spent a ton of time learning Webpack, learning how it works, and now I have a really nice framework that I can use for all of my plugins that I can just bring Yi2 components in. I can bring Vue.js 2 components in. I can leverage work other people have done. I can get a nice UI up and working pretty quick. So, I mean, I consider that worth it. But the confetti itself, very easy. The work to get the confetti there, very hard.
I think that
Go ahead.
What confetti?
So if you, Marion, that means you haven't installed any of my plugins lately. So if you go to any of my plugins except for SEO-matic, because I have some backporting to do, when you install them, you'll get a surprise. That's all I'm going to tell you.
Okay.
That's
Okay.
all I'm gonna
What
tell
you get for a paid plugin?
There you go.
Excellent.
Hey, someone's got to pay for the confetti, Marion.
Well, yeah.
I think this does bring us to a good point, though, or a good next topic is what can you do inside the control panel in terms of styling and in terms of CSS and JavaScript and markup. So this comes up quite often. Actually, people are asking, well, what is the JavaScript framework that Craft is using? And it's been called Garnish, and people are asking, well, how do I use it? Where's the documentation? And so forth. Also with style sheets and style guides. So so it would be interesting, Andrew, to hear a little bit about how easy or difficult it was for you to drop Vue.js in. But in terms of, dropping in your own CSS or JavaScript libraries, I imagine it to be quite simple.
Well, if I chose to make my life easy, then yes, it would have been pretty easy to do. But I was working on a kind of a larger skill enhancement for myself where I really wanted to learn Webpack. I really wanted to be writing everything in ES6 Plus or maybe even TypeScript. And I also really wanted to do dynamic code splitting. I wanted to be able to do async module loading. I wanted to be able to have both legacy JavaScript bundles with ES5 compiled code and polyfills and all that, as well as modern ES6 Plus bundles. So the route to get there was a good bit of learning and development work on my end to make that happen. But I consider it well spent because the same Webpack config that I'm using for plugins, I'm using for front end sites as well, because I get all the same benefits for the same reasons. Now that I have done all that and I've got a config that I like, super easy to spin these up and to just add things and
Right.
get stuff going. You don't have to do all that, right? I mean, in order to get this stuff in there, you don't have to do that. Craft actually even provides Yi2 in a Yi asset bundle, so you can just say I depend on this, and it will be loaded in. And that's because they're using Yi2 in the backend for the plugin store and for some other things. So I don't know. I mean, it's kind of a hard question to answer because I went off into the weeds to do all this stuff. But just to get something in there and working without doing this stuff, not bad at all. I mean, you just, you can use include.js or you can do put a script tag in there and kind of away you go.
Right, yeah. And the nice thing is that you can also access all of Craft's form fields through their form macro. That unfortunately is not documented. I have a plugin available which is for free. It's called Plugin UXD, which is the idea is that it tackles that issue and it helps you to build a user experience in your plugins. The issue I've had is that people don't really understand how it works and what it does. So I've created a new one which I've called CP Style Guide. I just have to write the documentation for that and put it out there. But that will be, I could do it today even. But that kind of...
Right, you heard it here first, everybody. Ben is doing it today. It's going to be released today.
Today is Monday, right?
September. Today is Friday, September 14th. All right, go ahead.
So essentially, it's kind of it's kind of something that's just it's usually there for content management systems, a general style guide that you can follow, and this plugin would just allow you to see how to build out those various form fields. So anything from a text field to an element select field or a table field or
So here's what I ended up doing. So in the same Retour plugin, one of the features that has been highly requested is the ability to import CSV files, right? So needed a way for people to click on a file, and then I needed a way for them to map, what field would go to what other field. because they may not be in the same order, and you got to drag them around, and some may not be, whatever. And for a minute, I thought about maybe delving into Garnish and figuring out how to do that via Garnish. And then I just said, nah. And I ended up using Vue to do it. And I did that because I know Vue pretty well. I'm definitely not an expert in it, but I know it pretty well. And there's some off-the-shelf components that make this stuff easier. And it ended up being so much less work doing it that way. And I'm a big fan of not learning stuff that I can't use in other places. And if I get better at Vue, I can use that all over the place. If I get really good at using Garnish, that's one place that I can use it, And I don't know. I mean, it's just that's how I think about things, and that may be a mistake, but I'm enjoying using Vue as my kind of development platform for the admin CP. Now, obviously, there's still some things that I do just using the form macros and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I have to think that Garnish isn't going to be around forever. Obviously, if you want to get something built today, it helps to have it and do it the Pixelantonic way. But I know there has been talk of the entire CP eventually going over to Vue or React or something within a more robust JavaScript framework. Because I have never tried to get into Garnish because for that same reason, like it's a whole lot of effort to learn something very particular that's not that well documented or really documented at all.
Well, that's the number one thing for me is there's no documentation.
Sounds like
And
it's a
yeah,
feature that there's no documentation that lets them move on to something else at some point.
Yeah,
that is true. But for believe me, I'm no stranger to reverse engineering things. I mean, I used to disassemble stuff and whatever. So I'm no stranger to doing that, but I don't want to.
Yeah.
I want good docs so I can get it up and running. And then I also want something with a community around it. And lots of people use these front end frameworks. And I can just go in there and ask them a question. And yeah, there are some very smart people in the craft community like yourself that knows a lot about Garnish, but the number is kind of small, relatively speaking.
Right. I wouldn't say I know a lot about Garnish. I know a few things about it because I use it because I like to keep things consistent in the in the user experience. But I think, as Patrick says, it's just a matter of time before they move on to something that's a bit more ubiquitous and has documentation, and it will likely be Vue.js. I think it's being used in the plugin store and Craft ID.
Yes.
So
Yep.
The same reason why we use Craft CMS is why they probably are going to want to use some kind of a framework for the admin.
Exactly. Yeah. And
the same exact reason.
This is pure speculation, but I think that could be a candidate for Craft 4. So rather than change anything under the hood, like they did for Craft 3, just kind of redo the control panel in a framework like Vue, for example.
Yeah, it'll have to be a major breaking change. So yeah, it would be a 4 or a 5 or whatever their I don't know what their time schedules are, but yeah.
Right. So just going
back,
I
would fully support it.
Yeah.
Even though it would break all of my plugins, like I would rather them move on to something nicer in the long run that breaks my stuff than kind of do what happened with Ellis Labs and Expression Engine, where there were too overly concerned, or I don't know. I don't know what their reasoning was, but with maintaining kind of backwards compatibility, I mean, at some point you got to break some stuff.
You do.
At some point you just got to break it.
Backwards compatibility is this kind of like double-headed snake or whatever they say, because it sounds great, right? This is backwards compatible to PHP 5.3. So, if your server is running an old version of PHP, you don't need to update.
Right.
But that means if you're writing software, so if you're writing plugins for this, then you need to make those, assuming that you want to support what the CMS supports. You also need to support 5.3, which means that you can't use any of the newer features of PHP. And 7 introduced a whole bunch of them. And you're kind of stuck using legacy PHP, and you're not getting the benefits of how far along that programming languages has come.
Yeah, I mean, as soon as PHP 7 came out, like I was not spinning up anything that didn't use it because the performance benefits were just amazing. And I am so glad that they decided to make PHP 7 a requirement for Craft.
Yeah.
Like I am so happy that they did that.
Yeah. So breaking changes and backwards compatibility. I think, when you bring out a new major version, Craft is using semver, which is semantic
Yep.
versioning. That means they won't, the 4.0 won't be released. Sorry, that means that when what am I trying to say? That there will be no incompatible changes or breaking changes introduced until 4.0. Does that make sense?
Let's hope.
Did I say that correctly?
Sort of.
You did. I just hope it happens.
But going back to what we were saying about, bringing your own JS or CSS into the control panel, it is very easy to do. And it means that you don't have to depend on what's already there, and you don't have to learn Garnish. But as we all agree, it would be good to have some sort of unified, maybe also CSS framework, I don't know, but certainly a JavaScript framework that's documented. And
yeah, I know they're using Tailwind for, in addition to using Vue 2, they're using Tailwind for the plugin store and some other things. So, I mean, who knows?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they'll end up using that for it. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, standards are good because then you have, in this case, just like we like the fact that we have smart people at Pixel and Tonic that are maintaining the CMS. With the JavaScript frameworks, you are glad that you have smart people like Evan Yu and the other core maintainers for Vue. Same thing applies for React. And then with Tailwind CSS, you have smart people like Adam Watham, who we've had on, that is maintaining that. And you get the benefits of that, right?
Yeah.
You have smart people that are really good at their specialized thing and are motivated to keep it updated and to maintain it. And then you don't really have to worry about it.
Right. In an ideal world, Pixel and Tonic are working on Craft and not on the JS framework that's powering it. And right, they're adding new content management features.
Exactly. So let's kind of get to something related to that, which is what about using, especially with the advent of Jamstack, and a lot of people are going that route. We can use Craft as a headless CMS too, right?
Yeah, we can. Do you want to define what a headless CMS is, or has that been on the show before?
It's probably been on the show, but we probably should do it. So a headless CMS basically, it manages, and you can correct me, but this is my own internal definition. A headless CMS is one that it maintains the content, but it's not responsible for rendering it at all. It just provides the content via an API.
Yeah, that sounds exactly right. I mean, Craft, we know Craft as the content management experience plus Twig, the templating language. But you could actually just not bother with Twig and use Craft to manage your content, and then use an API to get that content into whatever app you've built, like a Jamstack app, to display it or do whatever you want with it.
Yeah, and lots of people are doing that, right? I mean, because it isn't to say that, quote unquote, traditional development is dead, because I don't think it is at all. But lots of people are using these front end frameworks, and more and more people are using Craft kind of as an API server, so that they can use whatever their front end development language of choice is. And then also they get the benefit of, if they end up wanting to write a native iPhone app, well, hey, we've already got a content server that it can pull the content from,
right?
Or any other thing.
And often it's not one or the other. Often you'll have templates, but you'll also have an app somewhere else, like a native app somewhere, and it's getting the content from the API. So those can both work in sync.
Yeah, and when we say API, like, what are we talking about? What are our options when it comes to Craft CMS?
So natively we have, well, we could use Twig templates, but let's not talk about that. But natively we have the Element API, which is a native Craft plugin. And then we have Craft QL, which you've discussed on the show.
Yeah, and those are really the two major ones.
Right.
I mean, yeah, like Michael has discussed before, you can create your own kind of API-ish thing with Twig, but like I've done it and don't do it. Like it's doable, but it's just don't. So you can use the Element API to make it, or you can use what I have am preferring these days is using GraphQL with Mark Hewitt's awesome GraphQL plugin. And that opens up the doors where, you know, you can use something like Gatsby and you can have it talking to Craft, and Craft is serving, Craft is where the nice friendly admin CP that your marketing team, you know, enters stuff into. And then Gatsby takes care of pulling in that data via the API and building a static site that gets, you know, the distributed via Netify or Netify. Sorry, I always say that wrong. That's another one that I always say wrong. But yeah, there's some pretty amazing stuff that you can do with that, and I think that I'm really enjoying doing that kind of development work.
Yeah, and if you find yourself needing something a bit more specific, then you can always just create a plugin, have a controller
Yep.
action. You know, it's good practice to at least have an API key or something to authenticate that call, and return, you know, whatever you need to return.
I was going to say, I would just, I've been talking a ton. I wanted to make sure that I gave Patrick a chance to jump in here and either say anything or ask any kind of questions that have come up in your mind from the conversation.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I mean, I have done a little bit on this end. We had a project where we were using Craft as the store for content for the marketing ends of things, but then actually most of the data was actually coming off of AWS Lambda endpoints and all that. We ended up using Craft. We still used it for its templating engine, but then we're doing everything through pulls of, off to Lambda. We were using Ajax pulls to the Element API. We're never actually rendering Craft fields through through Twig. It was really just being used as a way to handle routing.
It's a hub.
Yeah, and it was a really cool project in a lot of ways. I think it comes down to, does someone want to be tied to Craft forever for the life of their application? I personally have no problem with that. It's a good team behind it. You don't have to worry about things languishing out there for a long time or constantly having major breaking changes, except for maybe major versions. And it was a really positive experience for us.
Yeah, it's interesting you said that about being married to Craft. I mean, I think your typical website or web app, it's not like a marriage. Like it's not for life. Like these things have a shelf life.
Yep.
And I think if you get 5 years out of your website, like you're pushing it. Like that's impressive that you've done that, right?
Yep.
So I don't think it's a huge long-term commitment, but if you do sort of accept the idea of using it more as an API server, I mean, then you're even less coupled to it.
Yep.
You know?
Yeah, and even then, I mean, you're always making a decision about joining up with something, whether it's Laravel or Yes It Is, or Django or anything else. It's a bad idea to be hooking up, just trying to run something in vanilla PHP, because you're gonna lose out on getting all that benefit. With Craft, you're getting the benefit of Yi, having all of its mature stuff under the hood, and then also Craft just giving people a kind of a top-notch user experience for entering content. So yeah, it's I've heard people, and I think it was Matt Stouffer at Peers a couple years back saying, if you're building an application, don't do it on a content management system. At some point it's going to come back and haunt you. And I mean, that almost sounds like Ben with going back to EE2 and doing things like that. But yeah, right. I think because Craft can get out of the way so much of the rest of Yi, to me, it definitely augments Yi and doesn't need to be the be all end all that other CMSs tried to be.
I was at that when he gave that presentation. I remember asking him, why not? Like, why can't it be built on
and
that?
I remember there were a couple of really nice guys from down in Florida. Stream Monkey, I think the company's name was, and Expression Engine was running their project, and they're like, oh no. Fantastic people. But yeah.
But you're right, though. I mean, I think things have changed to some extent that you really can build the kind of thing that you could build on Laravel. You can do that on Craft because you're essentially you're building a Yi app, and it's no different, other than it's a different framework from building a Laravel app. It's just a question of whether the project, as Ben was saying, is content centric, and if you really get the benefit out of having a nice admin CP, content modeling, and all that kind of good stuff. And some projects you don't, and that's fine. Use Laravel, use Yi2, use Node, whatever makes sense for it. But a lot of projects I've seen people build them custom Laravel apps and spend an inordinate amount of time building or rebuilding like an admin UI, right? Now, I think that's been addressed somewhat with Laravel Nova, but still, you're kind of building this stuff custom. And for every project, how much of that is needed. And for some, yes, that kind of customizability is super important and it's worth doing it. But for others, you may be spending more time working on the content modeling and the admin CP than you are working on the actual app. And that's not a good thing. That's not good at all. Marion, I wanted to make sure that I gave you a chance to chime in here and give us your thoughts and questions and
My
such.
pearls of wisdom. I'm not coming up with any right now.
Yes.
But
no more dripping wax CSS.
That was a good one.
Yeah.
Well, there was something that Patrick said that reminded me of a project I worked on. I believe this was in Craft 1. So a company came to me and they wanted me to build this app for them that would do a bunch of things with the Twitter API, and it would allow you'd give access to this app, and it would check all of your contacts and all of your tweets and all of your messages and everybody you're following and who they're following. It was very complex, but they wanted it. So they wanted a prototype, and I was like, well, if it's a prototype, maybe we build it on Craft because we get the admin panel and a bunch of stuff for free.
Mm-hmm.
But very likely, it's not going to be as performant as we need, and it's not going to be to scale to that point. We probably going down the line will bring this over to a different framework. So I built this out for them, and what we found was that it was actually working really well. And this was on Yi1, so it wasn't as fast as it is now.
That's shocking.
Yeah, I was surprised myself. And they were really happy with the user experience. And they were like, well, we're happy with the control panel. It feels really nice. And, it can even sit along our website, although it was on a different server because it was doing so much crunching and processing. And actually what happened was that we exceeded the allowance for our Twitter API. And that thing gets quite expensive when you get into high numbers. And they didn't have the budget for that. So it actually wasn't a limitation of the technology that we were using. It wasn't a limitation of Craft or Yi. It was actually for a different reason. But that really showed me what it was capable of. And we know that that was likely using, I don't know, PHP 5.6. It was using Yi1 and Craft 1. So
that's amazing that on PHP 5, on Yi1 and Craft 1, that it was performant. Like that's impressive.
So that gave me a lot of confidence in that stack that I was using, and now I wouldn't give it a second thought because I know that I can, if I need to bypass anything that the Craft is doing that's slowing it down, and I can just build it right on top of Yi. I'm going to get all the performance benefits.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Yi 2 is an incredibly robust, enterprise grade, incredibly performant framework. It really is. And use it when it makes sense to use it, and use Craft when it makes sense to use Craft.
And going back to what I said in the beginning, that's kind of why when I'm, when somebody brings me a request for an application or a project, I have to ask myself the question, well, is there any reason that this would not, the Craft would not be the right tool for this job?
Yeah. And I've run into that too. And there have been cases where it was not, right? Which is fine. Not everything is going to fit in there. And I think everyone is, they kind of have a bias to use whatever technology they're used to, right? Like if you approach a developer that has experience in PHP, they're going to want to write it in PHP. If they know Go, they're going to want to write it in Go. If they do JavaScript, they're going to want to write it in Node. And yes, all of these things can be built either well or poorly using anything. But I'm a big fan of kind of standing on the shoulders of giants. And when people have done a really good foundation for me, I look for reasons to leverage that, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that about wraps it up for another episode of the devMode.fm podcast. To have every episode delivered to your favorite podcast player, subscribe to our RSS or subscribe via iTunes or Google Play. And if you like what we're doing, leave us a review. You can follow us on Twitter at devModeFM. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this episode. Leave us a comment on the devMode.fm website. For the devMode.fm podcast, I'm Andrew Welch.
I'm Patrick Harrington.
I'm Marian Newlevant.
And Ben, our special guest, thank you for coming on.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. It's been fun.
Yeah, it was wonderful talking with you. I think we're going to have to do it again.
Absolutely.
Congratulations. Thanks to all of my tangents. I think we just did the longest podcast that we have ever done.
I'm sure there have been longer.
And we could go on, right? We could go on.
We definitely could.